I also believe that with AI, these like 10x engineers that are out there that I do know can become even more efficient than ever before.
Today, I speak with Jose Moreno. He is the CEO and founder of Neulight. That is a startup that is disrupting the education space and revolutionizing student support. Jose talks about his adventures in tech through the ranks at Microsoft, onto Netflix, and how it takes a team of A players to launch and grow and make your startup successful. So enjoy the show. This is Jose Moreno. You started your career at Microsoft, so I'd love to hear the difference. Well, first off, what took you to Microsoft, and then the difference between what the experience was at Microsoft to moving to, say, to Netflix, which I'm sure was night and day.
Yeah, so I did an internship at Microsoft between my junior and senior year, and they offered me a job at the end of the internship, which I was extremely happy about because I graduated in 2009, which was right after that Great Recession. A lot of people were having trouble grabbing jobs. Yeah. I am so lucky in terms of the team that I ended up joining at Microsoft. I was part of the Windows Live Cloud organization at that time, which was focusing on centralizing a lot of data providers. And so I worked on Windows Live Profile. So now when you log into Windows and when you log into Xbox and anything else that's Microsoft, it's your same profile there that roams with you. That wasn't the case before 2010-ish.
Yeah.
And so I think the biggest benefit that I had by like joining that team was that I was immediately thrown into a team that was focusing on building extremely large distributed systems for 500 million plus customers, right? And so basically thrown straight into it. I learned from some of the best engineers that I've worked with my entire career during those first few years at Microsoft. And so I'm very grateful for that. Then,
yeah, one of the things I noticed about the identity and Windows Live, I've always thought about how difficult it must be to integrate all the massive legacy systems and then the new wave of applications. Like, what kind of challenge was that like?
Yeah, so I think that was like the extremes that I saw at Microsoft. So the team that I joined, the teams that I worked on for my first few years, there was no legacy systems. It was brand new code that we were writing.
Nice.
It was an entirely new concept kind of for Microsoft and a lot of people in the technology sector. So while I was there for like my first few years, I kept hearing that Microsoft is slow and like not very innovative. And I was like, I'm not resonating with like any of this. Like I don't see it. I think you guys are wrong. And then for my last couple of years at Microsoft, I moved over to Exchange to work on the anti-spam team because they wanted to bring in some of the concepts that we built on the other organization into Exchange. And that's where I started feeling some of that slowness. Like we came in, we built a system, and it was awesome. It was really fast. They could scale, and they were like, "Nah, we don't like this. Like, let's put everything back into this framework sort of style of implementation." And that wasn't for me. And that was kind of like towards the end of my Microsoft career. But that's really when I started feeling like how slow Microsoft could be and the amount of legacy systems that they have. And
then you jumped into probably one of the more exciting tech media companies of our generation, Netflix. You know how did you make that move? You know, I get a sense of why. How did you make a move, and then what was the difference when you hit it off at Netflix?
Yeah, I actually love this story because it's not something that's very intuitive. So a lot of, tech companies in general will ping engineers to try to recruit them, right? And so a lot of times when I got pinged, I would go to Glassdoor at the time and look at the rating for the company. And for most tech companies, if I remember correctly, it was like a 4-star around there. When Netflix pinged me, I looked at the Glassdoor reviews and I saw that they had like a 2.5 or 3-star review. And I was like, whoa, that's interesting. That's new. And so I started going through like the reviews just out of curiosity. And a lot of people started talking about like this culture of fear. But at the same time, others started mentioning like the Netflix culture and the focus on the like superstar team. And so I was like, what is this? And so I looked up the Netflix culture deck and I went through that and I loved it. I was like, I love the concept. Yeah. Just being able to have like a company filled with stellar teammates that you can depend on was extremely exciting. And so that was kind of why I started looking into it.
I love that sort of like, reverse review concept.
Exactly.
It's awesome, but it's a sink or swim environment, right? If you're surrounded by amazing people and you want to do the work and you're really into it the same way they are, it's going to be an incredible experience. And to last 10 years, I think, was it 10 years you were at Netflix?
9 years, yeah, 9.5.
Speaks to your capability and impact, but also like the environment around you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the culture of fear, or the fear aspect of it, definitely exists. Like, there's a lot of anxiety around not knowing if you're going to get fired in the next month or so. But
Yes.
luckily it only lasted 3 or 4 years for me. But then I actually started to see how impactful I was able to be as an engineer at Netflix. And so I started getting a little more comfortable.
It's certainly not for everyone, and I wouldn't, I wouldn't promote it to everyone, but I also understand, like, I get it, and even like at the biggest growth points of my life, it's because I was like, having imposter syndrome, or feeling like I wasn't doing enough, or feeling like, whether it's like external, internal, boss, market, whatever, you get the sense that, you get pushed into making decisions, you get pushed into change and growth.
Yeah. There was high expectations. I saw people that would join, and obviously in the first month, you get plenty of opportunity to ramp up and actually learn about the processes and try to make the impact that you're going to make. But I saw people join and leave within a month because the anxiety wasn't really allowing them to sleep. And I understand it. It's tough. Yeah. It's not for everybody, for sure.
Totally. So then fast forward to, was it just last year? Okay, you have worked at the big tech stars, these leading companies in West Coast, and you decided to just pack it in. You threw it all out and decided to start yourself. And like a lot of great startup founders come from that background, but also a lot of engineers don't. A lot of engineers stay where they are. They see the growth. They're happy. They're content. They found a space, but you threw it out the window to start your own thing.
Yeah.
Why?
It's quite challenging. I mean, so for me personally, we delivered a pretty huge project in the middle of last year. It was multiple years of investment to get it out, which is the account sharing initiative. Let me apologize for that right now. But I was the tech lead for that project, and it was quite stressful, but also extremely impactful. It resulted in 40 million subs being added over the next 12 months after release. And so I think anytime that you finish a big project like that, you just kind of take a step back and evaluate life. Like, okay, cool. Like, what do I want to do within Netflix? Like, all right, what's the next big project? And started kind of feeling that out and having a little, some ideas, which I hear are taking off now, which is great. But at the same time, I was just kind of thinking, like, is this what I want to continue with? Do I want to explore other options? I knew that ChatGPT released at the beginning of 2022, and I also believe that it was going to be extremely impactful. Sorry, 22. And that it was going to be extremely impactful, and there were going to be a lot of opportunities out there. And so one of the first things that I did was actually talk to a few AI startups, Character, and I'm forgetting some of the other ones, but I saw a lot of interest there. The biggest challenge for me for joining a startup where I wasn't necessarily the founder was the amount of risk that I would have to take in order to do it, right? Because salary goes down significantly, equity goes up significantly, and the equity only matters if it's actually successful. So it depends a lot on the founders of those companies. And so then what I started wondering was, like, okay, if I'm going to take this much of a risk for equity, what if, I believe in myself, I believe in what we can do. I believe in my network and the team that I've built. And so I was like, well, maybe I should just take that risk where we own the majority of that equity and try to see if we can make this successful.
Well, tell me where you started. Did you start with the idea, the presumption, the insight? Did you do some market research? Did you find a co-founder? What was the first move? What enlightened you to the problem that needed to get solved?
So the first step for me was deciding, okay, maybe let me take a shot at a startup. And then it started to become a question of what the problem would be, right? And so I started wondering what sector would I want to go into. I already had kind of a belief that the education sector tends to be overlooked by Silicon Valley, and I see that as an opportunity. I also believe that with AI, these 10x engineers that are out there that I do know can become even more efficient than ever before. one of the things that I really respected about Netflix was how much of an impact they were able to have with such a small company. In 2015, they had about 3,000 employees. And even now, I think they're only up to like 12,000 compared to like Google and Microsoft that are in the hundreds of thousands of employees. It's very different, right? And so what I started thinking about was like, maybe we can have a super efficient company within the education sector that can create high quality software and help out educators. And so then I started zoning in on the education sector. Luckily, my cousin is a vice principal for a school in LAUSD. And so I rang her up and I was like, hey, I'm thinking of starting something, but I'm not really sure like what, like, tell me about your day to day. What's your biggest problem on any given day? And that's when she started telling me about this new social and emotional behavior framework called MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support. So it's a new way of going about student support that's focused on taking the overall context of what's happening with the child and teaching them social and emotional and behavioral skills to deal with that better in the future. A classic example that I like to go to is when I was in high school, if two kids got into a fight, there was usually a zero tolerance policy. So that meant either they immediately got suspended, or if it was like a recurring theme, they would get expelled. And essentially that means that they're taking out of the classroom, they're falling behind. You don't give them any skills to deal with that better in the future. You don't resolve the issue that created the fight. And exclusionary practices like that are overly applied to minorities. The MTSS framework says, maybe we could do better here. Like maybe we can have a mediator sit down with the two kids that got into a fight, understand what the issue was, help resolve that, and then provide them with skills on how to do better moving forward. And so as she was telling me like about that framework, I was falling in love. And what she told me was that her teachers just were not understanding it. It's a very theoretical framework in nature. Teachers get very limited number of training days for everything in a year, something like 4 days a year. And so to expect them to understand this framework is pretty unrealistic. And so what they were doing was every time a kid got into some sort of situation, they would just send the kid to the office, and she was dealing with it a lot. And she was like, a lot of times they could just do it directly in the classroom, but they don't get it. And so that was like, and I was like, oh, this is an area where maybe AI can help, and we can build an entire platform to help support teachers be able to implement the MTSS framework.
Totally. No, that's fascinating. Obviously, having kids in school at the moment, and have an 8 and 10-year-old, I understand the sort of situations, and there's always nuance, and you can always feel like they're, and it's growing up, and especially in your own experience, there are moments in time that can knock your trajectory off, or set your trajectory for life. And if there is a action or reaction from a school that sets you off in the bad path, it can be hugely detrimental.
It can be. And I have a personal story where I was suspended for gang-related activities when I was in middle school.
Yeah.
Now I can tell you, I'm the same nerdy person that I've always been my entire life. I've never been part of a gang, anything even close to it. But because without a the physical altercation, me and 3 other friends spoke to another kid about like him disrupting class. Honestly, it is even the nerdiest like subject. But because it was like a 4 against 1 sort of conversation, they immediately jumped to it being a gang related activity, and I got suspended in 7th grade. And I've never been in trouble before. I didn't even know where like the dean's office was or anything like that. Then for the rest of my middle school and high school career, as I was focusing on going to college, I just had this huge sense of anxiety on whether or not that suspension was going to be a detrimental factor in terms of me being able to get a higher education. Luckily, it wasn't, but the anxiety was always there. And it's still something that stuck around with me until now.
Wow. That's personal experience, but so I guess you talked to your cousin, and everything she said sort of rung out with your own experiences and how your own insights. So tell me what happened next. Like, did you create like a prototype? Did you set up a marketing? Like, what was the next action?
Actually, yeah. She was coming up to San Francisco to visit her, I think, husband's mother-in-law, her mother-in-law. And I was like, the following week, and I was like, oh, maybe I can create like a quick little prototype here and show you what I'm thinking. And so I created it. I showed it to them at a lunch, and they were like, this could be like really good. And so at that point, I was like, okay, maybe I should dig into this a little bit more. So I started pinging other friends that I had in education where I was like, have you heard of MTSS? Like, is this an LAUSD thing only? And they were like, oh my God, that's my focus. And I was like, oh, well, what if you had something like this early? This would save me so much time. This would be amazing. Perfect. And then the next person and next person. And so I talked to a few people in education and they were all like very excited about it. And
Yeah.
that was like a huge signal to me that it was worth investing into. And so
Yeah.
then the next step was getting my co-founder on board because so he's one of my best friends, but he also has a PhD in machine learning. And so he's an AI expert. If we're going to
Nice.
be an AI company, I want an AI expert, especially if we're dealing with something as personal as student support. And so talked to him for a couple hours. And within those couple hours, he also got pretty excited and he jumped on board. Turns out that his mom had been in education his entire life. And so it was already kind of like a natural fit. And then from there, we just kept running.
It's funny how these serendipity kind of happens at these times when you're trying to find a thing and trying to focus. And it is like you say, the signals. If all the signals are green, you got to take it seriously. It's you do yourself a disservice by ignoring it. So then, like, what happens is the company bootstrapped? Is it funded? Like,
so
you get it off the ground.
I'm bootstrapping the company for now. That funding question has been a big kind of open item in my mind the entire time.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do right now is get into a revenue to come in. I'm keeping the company as small and efficient as possible, right? If we get enough revenue coming in, then we cover all costs. Then we could just stay and grow in that scenario, unless like there's a huge growth sort of moment that comes in. Then at that point, we'll look for external funding. But playing around with it, honestly, I think the pressure of paying for everything is starting to get to me also. And so every once in a while, I'm like, maybe I should go out and look for funding. And people have offered, which is nice. So I have some options.
It changes the game, but also there's probably ways of doing it in a way that you don't hand over too much control, too much debt, for want of a better word. Emotional debt, pressure, all this stuff that comes along with getting institutional money, for example. So tell me about the revenue. Tell me about the actual application itself. What stage you're at, where it's been implemented.
Yeah.
Why should it be used?
So we finished off an MVP over the summer. We launched our website in late spring. So we got a few districts and schools interested. Actually, my favorite sort of like pop quiz moment for our company so far is that the first school to apply for IntelliTier through our website came from Montana. And so I thought that was kind of interesting, but they're one of our first customers. But since we finished the MVP over the summer, what we started looking for was to get feedback on it. Like, is this actually valuable for you? What else can we add in to add additional value? And that's the feedback kind of rounds that we're going through now. And so we want to continue to build out IntelliTier before focusing on revenue next year. The academic sort of school year makes it a bit more challenging, but also at the same time fitting for, I guess, how we're going about it. I think we adjust it to them as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah.
But we will be looking for revenue for the 25.
Let me ask you, how would you describe product market fit? And do you think you've reached that?
This is a great question. So I think we are close to product market fit. I'll put it in that way, because every time that I talk to somebody about this in the education space, or I show them the demo and they actually use IntelliTier, they get excited. They really want to use it. They want to apply it to their schools. So from that sense, I do think that we're close to product market fit. On the other side, I won't be comfortable until revenue actually starts coming into the startup. I think once people start paying us for it, at that point, I'll start to say like, yeah, I think we found product market fit.
Yeah. Well, I sense, I sense something in you, Jose, that it's like, that driver of pressure or anxiety is slightly like, that is almost what pushes you that extra mile.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it's, at this point, you can't just presume at this point, right? You can't just presume you have product market fit unless somebody's actually paying for it,
Exactly.
You feel like you've got something that that's clicking, But once you have, the first 100 customers that are, can't live without it, that are paying for it, will be very, very upset if you leave. You can't rest in your laurels.
Exactly. I'm a very data-driven type of person. And so I don't like to jump to conclusions without actually seeing that data to support my hypothesis.
Jose, what's your biggest realization in becoming a founder? Seeing the insides of some really large, successful tech companies to becoming a founder. Like, what advice would you give, or what insight can you provide about what it's like to make that shift?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that's caught me by surprise is how much doubt can creep in on any given day. Even though all signals are extremely positive, which I believe like we have seen, on any given day, you're just wondering like, is this actually going to work out? Are people going to pay us? Are we going to be able to get there? And so you really have to believe in yourself. Unrealistically there's a term for this. Unrealistic optimist is what I started saying, that like you have to be in this situation in order to be able to push through a lot of those doubts. That's one. There's a big mental like game to this. And then the second one is marketing is extremely important. Being able to build the brand for the company, build the brand for you, the trust that you can deliver a product like this has to be a big focus for the company. I think a lot of times as technical founders, we focus a lot on the product and building the best product that it can be. But if you build the best thing ever and nobody knows about it, then you don't have anything. And so we're starting to focus a lot more on marketing, doing this podcast, for example, to help get the word out for what we're doing.
There's no doubt about it. Like, in a similar boat, I'm a technologist myself. I was an engineer for many years, and it was wonderful and exciting to build fantastic products. And, you feel really good about it. And that dopamine is one of the things that keeps you going and up late at night and everything else. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's not getting out there and the right people are seeing it. One of the things I've learned, and at firsthand, just working, with 3 Advanced and our clients, is being able to identify and call out and be able to create content outside of the product for that audience, and to be able to target a specific audience and say the words that they want to hear, and be able to send those words in the right direction is crucial.
Yeah.
It's great to get the validation, to be able to speak directly with the people that are in the circle, so that you know the language, where they're hanging out, what they care about. Super, super important.
Exactly. The way that I'm thinking about it a lot more now is you need to provide value for other people, right? In order to get them interested. Nobody really cares about what you've gone through or like the product that you built. If it's not providing them with value, they're not going to do you favors and just like hand over money.
Yeah.
You have to give them value, and the focus always has to be on the customer.
Let me ask so far, from a tech perspective, are there any presumptions or any mistakes you've made? You've got a stellar career at places people would like. A lot of engineers would love to be there and get that experience. But now you're working on a startup, a brand new product. Is there an approach that needs to be different? Have you learned any things that you might do differently if you started from scratch right now?
I think I'm really lucky that Netflix was a microservice focused company. And so any given team at Netflix had to manage 8, 10 different services at any given point in time and strike up a new one like pretty quickly in order to solve the issue within that realm. And so I think what I ended up seeing was a pattern of how to build software that can scale. And I'm just bringing that pattern over. And luckily that seems to be working really well. Like our platform can already scale pretty easily horizontally. Just following a lot of that. And so for the most part, there hasn't been any huge missteps. We are using Azure for our identity provider for people to be able to log in with their Google account into our platform. The one thing that me and my co-founder don't like is that if you do use Azure in order to do that, when you're logging in, it says provide access to b2clogin.com, as opposed to being able to say like IntelliTier or Neulight. And there's no way to change it. And host's like, come on, like you made this so easy. Can't we just please change the name on there to have like our own branding there? And so if there's a mistake, I think that's the biggest one. and still deciding if we want to move forward with it or not.
Well, identity and authentication is one of those thorn in the sides for years. We were big on AWS, and for years it was such a battle with Cognito. Cognito was like really not as user friendly as say Google authentication, but the scalability and the long tail of that was super important to be on AWS for us. You know, especially going through, like you mentioned, microservices, and even the balance. It is, you know, it's often hard to balance between great infrastructure and architecture and then speed to market and simplicity.
Yeah.
And I think it's like it's good to find a balance. I think so long as you're in a position that you can scale very quickly, but you're not over engineering things too soon.
Yeah.
Especially again, you're in your situation where, you know, you're not hiring the $300,000 engineer like as your next hire. It's going to be lower. You're going to try to compensate in different ways. But it's a different sort of situation when you've got like tons of money to play with, and then you've got limited resources or a finite window before you can get that next level. You know, not everyone will have the same experience level as you've gone through.
Yeah. So that's actually something that I am doing a little bit different than most startups. Instead of hiring $150,000 engineer, I am looking to hire the $300,000 to $500,000 engineers. But I'd rather hire one of them than like 5 more intro engineers that I have to stay on top of. Because, and this was a big part of the Netflix mentality of the superstar team, right? Which is you should be able to trust the people that are on the ground to do the right thing in order to move forward towards the vision that you have outlined.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to bring over. So everybody in the company right now is extremely experienced and very good at what they do. And I think that that's what's going to set our software apart from others. Now,
Thanks.
They're not really taking a lot of salary right now. I think that's kind of the other part, but they're bought into the vision, and it's very heavy equity packages right now.
Yeah. Once you're seeing that you know, your outgoing expenses every month, and you realize that builds up very, very quickly. When you're footing the bill, you certainly start thinking about funding a lot sooner.
Exactly. And that's the back and forth that goes in my mind. It's like, oh, yeah, that burn rate's gonna be nice next year. Let's think about this a little bit more.
So just to talk about the size of the team right now, how does the team break up?
So we have my CTO and the AI expert was the first one. UI has not been my expertise. Back-end engineering has been more of my expertise. So I brought in a UI person. We just brought in a UX person to focus a lot more on the user experience. One of the things that we are really focused on is making the product as easy to use for teachers so that they can get in, get out, and then get back to focusing on teaching. And so having like a really strong UX and designer is really important for that. And then finally, we're starting up with a sales engineer pretty soon so that they can focus a lot more on the outbound, and I can focus a little bit more on product in the near term.
Yeah, totally. No, it's funny that we've harped on about UX for years and years, but we have found that more and more of our work is going not from the bulk of the application, but it's actually going, especially front end, it's going into onboarding. It's going into shareability and virility, any kind of like product-led growth features. So where it used to be like these slivers at the end that you would presume, oh, build a product, you know, everything will be great. It's like, no, product pieces in here.
Yeah.
Get them in, make people feel happy, comfortable, simple. And then obviously just be able to, on the other side of things, I'm not sure if there's the same opportunities with your application, but it's also like, how do you get the word out? How do you use the product to fuel growth?
Yeah. Yeah. So if there was like one piece of advice that I really learned from Netflix that I would share out with your audience is minimize friction as much as possible. Just make the thing as easy to use, allow people to get in there as quickly as possible. Any friction that you introduce, any extra page, even just on the onboarding process, gets people to drop out. That's from hundreds of A/B tests that I've seen like Netflix run. It was pretty constant. Anytime you add in friction, it's there's a negative effect there. And then, so we were thinking about how can we get the product into more people's hands so that they can start testing it and trying it out and then get the word of mouth going a little bit more. So we've introduced a free version of IntelliTier recently, which basically automatically creates a personal school for one user where they can use all the features for them specifically. So they can add in students, they could add in the SEB events, and then they can work with our AI assistant to try to figure out some personalized student support that they can do for their students. So that's completely free.
Right. Cool.
What differentiates the free from the paid version is having other people be able to join in at that same school and be able to collaborate together on the same data. So it's moving from a siloed version to a collaboration / team or school version of the product.
Yeah.
And we think that that's a good, fair way to introduce it.
Totally. No, I totally understand that. I feel like it's that multiplayer mode that gives it the extra the true value, and I guess the value people are going to actually pay for.
Yeah.
Which again, get them hook them something that has true value as an individual, and make it super powered across the board. I love it. So Jose, tell me what I can do to help. Tell me what message we're trying to get out here.
Yeah. If you're interested in learning more, head over to neulight.io. It's neulight.io. I try to be a little too clever with the name. Like, it's the combination of neural networks, which is what ML models are built on top of, and enlightenment. So that combo there. You could try out the free version of IntelliTier directly, or you can contact us. I'm looking at every single one of those messages right now, or learn more about our pilot programs for the following school year. But I'm more than happy to do demos and really walk anybody through the IntelliTier product to show what it can do.
I love that you say that you respond to every message and you read every message, because it's super important. I think founders need to realize they get into something. It's like, if you don't know what's happening at the ground level, it's, you're going to be lost. You're going to get lost in the value. You're going to get lost in the proposition.
Exactly.
Totally appreciate that.
Yeah. Got to stay on top of it.
Well, listen, Jose, before I drop off, any final words or any questions for me?
No, thank you for having me. I think this was a great conversation.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate it. I'm excited to learn more about Neulight, follow along with that. To everyone else, thanks for joining us for this episode of What's Happening. We heard about Jose's adventures in apps and AI. Podcast is brought to you by 3Advance. It's the development team for startups. We're a digital product studio that cares more about the business than we do about the apps. So check out what'shappening.tech. That's the sister company of 3Advance that's responsible for this podcast, for our newsletter every week. We keep founders in the know, and hopefully they learn a few things from podcasts like this. For now, thank you very much. Have a good week, and sláinte.
Thanks, everybody.